To order of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, 42nd Parliament, pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, December the 5th, 2017, Bill C-64, an act respecting wrecks, abandoned, dilapidated, or hazardous vessels and salvage operations. We have our witnesses here from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Fruzan Husani, Senior Policy Analyst, Kathy Naim, Acting Director, Preparedness and Response, Mark Sanderson, Acting Director General, National Strategies, and from the Department of Justice, Jamie Bishop, Legal Counsel, Yvette Marie Karen, Legal Counsel, Legal Services, and from the Department of Transport, we have Mark Yves Bertin, Director General, Marine Policy, Ellen Barak, Director General, Environmental Policy, Jeffrey Johnson, Manager, Clean Water Policy, and Michelle Sanders, Director, Clean Water Policy. So you are all here to answer questions from the committee and to comment on the various amendments and to provide the committee with that information. So thank you all for being here. So we will move right into the bill. So pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, consideration of Clause 1, the short title is postponed. So the chair calls Clause 2. If I have the support of the committee, where there are no amendments, I would like to group them so that we can move along swiftly, because otherwise we could be here till 8 o'clock. And we do have a vote. So, all right, do I have unanimous consent to group them where there are no amendments? Yes, thank you. So, Clause 2 to 4. Okay, shall Clause 2 to 4 carry? All those in favor? Carried. Okay. Clause 5, government amendment, moved by Mr. Fraser. Mr. Fraser, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, perhaps just very briefly, and I don't want to take up much time, but you'll see, colleagues, that there's a series of government amendments put forward. They largely amount to corrections of drafting errors or potential oversights. It's a fairly complex bill. I think the consequences are straightforward. I'd be happy to let the department officials explain, but when I saw the reasoning, it made imminent sense to me to adopt these. I don't expect them to be controversial, but I don't want to prejudge the analysis of my colleagues.
Would the department official like to comment on it, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This particular amendment is to deal with an oversight in importing the provisions from the Canada Shipping Act 2001. In that legislation, the government had existing authorities that enable regulations to deal with heritage wrecks, and this amendment will allow the retention of those authorities.
Thank you. Any further question or comments? All right, shall Clause 5 carry?
So we vote on the amendment first.
Oh, the amendment first, yes. So all those in favor of the amendment to G1? Okay, carries. Shall the clause carry? Those in favor, yes. Okay, then I can group clauses.
So the clause as amended.
The clause as amended. Please raise your hands. There's a lot of raising hands on these things. Thank you. Okay, we can now group Clause 6 to 20. Okay, any comments? All those in favor of 6 to 20? Thank you. Okay, now we will now move on to NDP 1. Ms. Malcolmson, would you like to speak to it before you hear from the department officials or after?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I'll describe first and then certainly appreciate the government witnesses' advice. So this changes, in the first one that the minister must take the measure. This was based on testimony from Anna Johnson from West Coast Environmental Law, saying right now her interpretation was that the legislation was discretionary in nature and calling into question whether the decision makers actually would take the measures necessary. And So her recommendation in a number of places was where it says the minister may, that the wording instead be changed to shall or must. And we pulled out the sections that had a clear environmental impact. That was our criteria for which ones to recommend. So this would give more accountability, more confidence to coastal communities that the actions outlined in the legislation would in fact be taken. And if not, that there would have to be some rationale provided. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, could we ask the department official to please comment?
Madam Chair, I'd submit that not all wrecks that are a result of maritime casualty necessarily pose a hazard that warrants federal intervention immediately. What's important is that the government officials have the ability to establish priorities based on the degree of hazard or the risk determined through science, other evidence, in consultation with local communities, Indigenous groups, and other jurisdictions in the case of flag states for international vessels. Removing the minister's discretion would require the federal government to intervene in all cases, even those in which the owner is willing and able to act but needs more time to address their wreck without creating additional risk. And this is contrary to the principle of polluter pay, that is one of the central objectives of this legislation. This amendment would also impose a significant burden on taxpayers, as it will require action on all wrecks, not only on those that pose hazards.
Any further comments? Right. Ms. Malcolmson?
What we've been hearing from coastal communities is very much that they want polluter pay, that they want the vessel owners to take responsibility for their pollution problem, but without the minister being willing to act and enforce the regulations and force action upon the vessel owner, then we may end up not so far ahead of where we are right now. The actions described here are not saying the minister will in every case himself go out and remove the vessel and pay the bill. That's not it at all. But if there's no teeth to this and no accountability, then we're going to continue to carry on as we have on our coasts for decades with people who will push the limits of the law and not take responsibility for their possessions and pollution, that they'll continue to be a problem for our environment.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor of the amendment proposed by Ms. Malcolmson? Opposed? Does not carry. Okay, shall clause 21 carry? Please raise your hands. Opposed? It carries. Ms. Malcolmson, would you like to speak to NDP 2?
Thank you, Chair. Again, we'll say for the sake of accountability, transparency, and the government actually taking action to enforce abandonment, again, not intending that then the full cost of cleanup always fall to the taxpayer, not at all. But some of the measures that have been proposed by coastal communities need the government to actually then push the owner of the vessel to actually follow through. And so that's why, based on the recommendation of West Coast Environmental Law Association and a great number of witnesses who indicated how long coastal communities have been looking for action on this, that must take the measures is a very important change. Otherwise, too much ministerial discretion means that this may, especially by future governments who are less committed to a solution than this one, will mean that we continue to have abandoned vessels on our coast.
The department officials?
Madam Chair, I'd offer that one of the other central tenets of this legislation is vessel owner responsibility. Vessel owners bear the responsibility for their vessels, and where possible and when possible should be compelled to take immediate action before the federal government intervenes. Most vessel owners are responsible, and changing may to must removes the possibility of having those vessel owners manage their vessels appropriately. So the amendment could have the effect of the government stepping in to take action in every case before the vessel owner has had the chance to take the appropriate action. It could also send the wrong message, I'd suggest. When the federal government's obligated to intervene, it signals that the responsibility is on the federal government alone. And as I mentioned, one of the central tenets of this legislation is vessel owner responsibility for the entire life cycle of their vessel.
Mr. Badaway?
Madam Chair, And with that said, would it go without saying that the financial burden may end up on the taxpayers? And I have to say, when I look at NDP 1, 2, 6, 10, 13, and I look at the Green Party 1, the amendments, it does sort of steer the financial responsibility based on the burden that you just outlined on the taxpayers. Would that be true?
Indeed, I'd submit that could be the case, and likely would be the case if the minister was compelled to act in every instance without first giving vessel owners the responsibility, polluters the responsibility to take action that they are required to do. The legislation includes education around the legislation. If passed, we'll need to make sure that all vessel owners understand what their responsibilities are, and we need to be consistent in that message, I would suggest.
And if I may, Madam Chair, when we look at the legislation, it puts a great emphasis on signaling that the people that should be taking responsibility are the ones that are, in fact, expected to take responsibility.
Yes, indeed, that's the case.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. Ms. May?
If I can't speak to that, I think my friend Vance Badway misspoke when he said Green Party 1 had the effect of moving any responsibility to government. My Amendment 1, which I get to speak to in a moment, is about vessel owners taking out insurance. So I think that may have been just a casual error.
Okay, that's fine. Ms. Malcolmson?
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the witnesses, this bill is largely based on the minister ordering that fines and penalties be issued to the vessel owner. My concern is that the legislation makes that a discretionary decision. So I don't understand the reluctance to say that the legislation requires the minister to act. How asking the minister to send a fine or a penalty to someone who's in violation of this legislation, how that puts an increased burden on the taxpayer.
Madam Chair, I'd offer that the legislation, one of the intentions of the legislation is to create a system where the owner takes the action, understands their responsibilities, and takes the necessary action in the case of a hazard or a wreck resulting from maritime casualty. We need having discretionary power to either minister, their officials, and other designates and delegates ensures that all information available is taken into consideration in the determination of what must take place. And vessel owners should need the opportunity to act if possible. The minister has the discretion if they need to act. That discretion exists. Discretion not to act by anybody is not necessarily what. That's not what the connotation that I understand from May that you're mentioning.
Much. Shall the amendment carry? All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those in favor of the amendment. Opposed? Does not carry.
Chair, could we have a
just
recorded vote for future votes? Is that possible, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. For all of the future votes, or the ones that have the amendments? All of the amendments, okay. All right, we're going to move, shall clause 22 carry? Would the clerk please do a recorded vote on that? She's asked for a recorded vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Point of order? I'd like clarification. We're going to do a person-by-person vote, recorded vote, sorry, I lost the words there, on everything now from this time forward, or are we just doing amendments?
Just the amendments.
But it should be.
Ms. Malcolmson has asked just the amendments. Have a recorded vote.
It should be amendment by amendment.
I
Just the
suspect that
amendments.
she should identify that before the amendment vote, not make it blanketing right across the entire report.
That's not acceptable.
She's asked for that on the amendments, so
We don't have to agree to it.
no, we don't have to agree, but it is her right to ask for a recorded vote on the amendments. So it's her right to ask for it, so. Yeah, but from here on in, it'll be only on the amendments, not on the others that's being grouped. That's fine, it's just
Okay.
on the amendments.
I just want clarification though. She has to ask for every amendment. She can't just blanket every amendment, whether it's Green or Liberal Party or our amendment, that it be recorded vote. She has to ask before the vote on that particular amendment, that particular time.
That's right.
Okay, so we are about to vote on clause 22.
Okay.
All right. The amendment we already voted down. Okay, now we're voting on clause 22. All those in favor of clause 22, please raise your hands. But you need a voice vote, don't you?
The amendment already carried.
Huh?
It's for all the other amendments.
Yes. Oh, it's for all the other amendments. Okay, it'll start after 22. All right? All right. All those in favor of clause 22? Okay, it carries. Okay, clause 23. Shall clause 23 carried? All those in favor carries. Okay, clause 24. Ms. May, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I do apologize to all of you, but I made a pledge to myself that when every single committee passed the same language that was used in the previous government, to require me to show up at every committee at clause by clause if I had an intention to amend a bill, which is not expanding my rights, but actually shrinking them, because otherwise I would have had the right to put these amendments forward at report stage. So I do put my objections on the record to the process, that every single committee has passed identical motions that substantially increase my already fairly serious workload. However, I now am happy to address my amendment, which, as you all will know because you passed said amendment, my amendments are deemed to have been tabled because I'm not a member of the committee and can't table them. My motion is deemed to have been tabled, but I won't be able to vote on it. I can speak to it. And what we're trying to do here with this amendment, and I do appreciate the work done on this. My gosh, I'm so grateful to Bernadette Jordan for her motion. I know Sheila's done a ton of work on derelict vessels. I'm very grateful to Parliamentary Secretary's work, to Karen. This is a good piece of legislation, but it can be better. And one of the things we heard from a lot of witnesses is that one way it could be better would be to apply so that the bill applied to more vessels that would have a mandatory requirement to carry insurance. As it stands right now, it's only going to be the really large vessels of 300 gross tonnage and more that we catch under the Nairobi Treaty anyway that we're going to be requiring to carry insurance. I looked around, and thanks to Parliamentary Library research as well, very helpful, looking at what's around the world, what kind of additional requirements for insurance are found in other countries. If you look at Denmark, you find that they have taken the requirements of the Nairobi Convention, and of course, they've made them tougher. They've gone to 20 metric tons, and that way, 20 gross tons, I'm so used to carbon dioxide equivalents, 20 gross tons for Danish ships. They must be required, if they're 20 gross tons, to carry insurance requirements. Now, according to Transport Canada's information, if this was applied to Canadian vessels, that would mean a further 10,000 vessels would be required to maintain wreck removal insurance. I think this would assist the bill in its robustness. I think it would ensure that we didn't have cases where the Government of Canada ended up having to fork out. We'd be able to find the vessels more quickly. We'd know who owned them because their insurance would have to be up to date. This is an entirely sensible amendment that is in the spirit and the keeping of the intent of this legislation. And I hope that the committee will seriously consider passing this amendment so as to improve the scope of the bill and the mandatory requirements that vessel owners are responsible and take responsibility by maintaining a level of wreck removal insurance on any vessel of 20 gross ton or more. And I think that suffices to explain my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. May. Okay, before I go over to the department, Ms. Jordan and then Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Ms. May for the amendment and for her thoughtful work on this legislation as well. And I'll be honest, I struggled with this one because I understand where you're coming from. However, I can't support the amendment simply because of the ability of small vessel business owners that operate in my riding and the adverse effect that this could have on fishers and the communities that support them. So I'm just very concerned that the additional insurance costs would adversely affect the fishers in my community, of which I have very, very many of.
Badaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and two questions to staff. One being, is it that all vessel owners remain liable under the wreck removal convention regardless of the size of the vessel? Is my first question. And my second question, again, with the same theme that I was outlining earlier, albeit there may have been a perceived clarification needed. What would the impact on the taxpayers be if, in fact, this amendment was passed?
Thank you. First to the first question that was posed, and that is, it bears repeating that all vessel owners do in fact remain liable under the Wreck Removal Convention, regardless of the size of the vessel. So to answer your question there, with respect to the issue of the burden on the taxpayers, with respect to this one, I think the honourable member from the Green Party, the leader of the Green Party, spoke appropriately in correcting the facts on that one. This would not, in principle, affect the taxpayer bottom line, if you will. Now, that said, this amendment would put Canada out of step with 41 other countries that are signatories to this convention, including Denmark, who has looked at 20, but has not moved on that issue. Okay. Further, there is no compulsory insurance requirements of any kind on small vessels under 300 gross tons, and our consultations with insurers suggest that the market may not be available for them to acquire such insurance. So therefore, to the point being made by the member to my left, this could indeed have implications for small operators, whether that's in the fishing sector or in the tourism sector, and therefore have implications for local economies. Lastly, I would say that compulsory wreck removal insurance and focusing on it would in fact prioritize wreck removal costs over other types of losses, such as loss of life and other types of damages. So a consideration to keep in mind.
And if I may, Madam Chair, to the question, and of course to the clarification, I'll say to the honourable member across that I stand corrected.
I have Mr. Hardy and Mr. Fraser with questions.
Sorry. So if I can just add, in fact, from a certification perspective and the requirements to issue certificates, if we are in fact moving towards a lower threshold, if we were to do that, actually you're quite right in pointing out that there would be an administrative burden, a sizable administrative burden on the department to execute on that. My apologies.
Mr. Hardy.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I believe Washington State has instituted something where there's an annual levy of some sort, right down to and including recreational boat owners, that creates a fund that can be used to clean up boats that have been otherwise abandoned. Is there an opportunity in the regulation setting process that will accompany this legislation to perhaps introduce that notion?
Thank you for the question. Part of the national strategy on abandoned vessels that was announced as part of the Oceans Protection Plan is to look precisely at owner-financed funds, both for large vessels and for small vessels. The modalities of doing that have yet to be determined, but discussions are underway with the provinces and territories and others about how best to set up those types of funds. And it may well be a regulatory approach under this legislation, but that is still to be determined.
Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the member from Saanich Gulf Islands as well, who always makes me think in this place. This was actually something I was planning on proposing myself. I had a bit of a back and forth with some info from the department that they gave me a little heartburn because I didn't realize there were certain issues wrapped up in it. And I actually expected our colleague Mr. Chong to bring this forward because it was his line of questioning that tipped this idea off to me in the first place. Of course, the point that my colleague Ms. Jordan put forward about essentially local fishermen in Nova Scotia bearing the brunt of the load, for me, was a big problem. But one of the issues that I wanted to get a better handle of was the kind of consultation that you undertook as a department to understand, as you mentioned, that there wasn't a market necessarily for the insurance. I would hate to legislate something that is impracticable in the real world that we live in. Could you perhaps comment on the availability of insurance?
So as part of our consultation process, we actually issued two documents, one in 2010 and one in 2015, where we looked at the scope and then after operationalization We consulted a range of stakeholders, including municipalities, where admittedly there was some support or an interest in the issue. However, more broadly, the considerations that this discussion reflects very much came to the fore. We did speak to the insurance market, that is to representatives from the insurance market to get a better understanding of what existed. In the end, what they were able to confirm for us was the sense that 300 was the lowest level possible in terms of gross tonnage to target, insofar as there was an understanding that the market could bear and support products or insurance solutions for vessel owners in that space. By the same token, they indicated that further analysis would be required, but that from their perspective, it was not a big question in their minds as to whether or not the market could shift towards this type of insurance. Now, that said, owners tend to have some form, or those owners that do have insurance tend to make that as part of their business operations or their home. It's not specific to REC, but when they do apply it, they do so within their operating businesses or their home insurance.
Perhaps as a follow-up, I'll ask a courtesy of the officials here. I remain concerned about this. I'm not necessarily convinced that the reduction to 20 tons is the absolute answer. As the plan develops to establish the kind of group financed program that Mr. Hardy's questioning led to, if you could perhaps update the committee just as a courtesy so we understand what the process is, because I have a deep concern about ships both big and small being abandoned and the risks that they pose. So I would ask as a favor to the committee if you could keep us in the loop as things develop on that specific issue.
We certainly can. I would also note that the issue of the threshold is something that we recognize there's a conversation about, and because of that, the regulatory making powers in this statute actually enable us to take a look at that issue down the road if, for various reasons, there's a desire to re-explore and reopen the issue of gross tonnage thresholds.
Okay. Thank you. On Ms. Malcolmson and then Ms. May.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the spirit of the amendment that's proposed, but I do share the concerns about cost impact. And I'm also not feeling, my memory is not that we heard a lot of testimony through all the witnesses that we heard from, that this was the remedy that they were seeking. I think there was more encouragement towards small vessel registration, pleasure craft registration to actually capture these within the system. And we also did hear testimony, I think, from Rod Smith from Ladysmith Maritime Society, that in fact there are some vessels that are voluntarily insured, but they are not registered. So we still have some pieces. So like some of my colleagues, I'm open to looking at this in the future, but I would be concerned that by going ahead to approve this amendment, that we would be doing it without the information about what our stakeholders are looking for and what the cost might be to them.
Okay. Would the department like to respond?
Yes. I can tell you that during the course of the consultations with stakeholders, that they were quite clear in echoing some of the conversations and statements here in terms of the significant, in their terms, significant financial impacts on vessel owners that this could represent if we lowered the threshold. And that, because of that, we are encouraged to take a look at doing a full benefit analysis before moving into this space.
Ms. May.
Getting back to the question about Denmark, I actually found the information that says, and I'll just quote, says Denmark has implemented this requirement for all Danish ships of 20 gross tons, and it comes from a Transport Canada document. So I'm a bit confused as to the status of the Danish 20 gross tons, since I got it from some of the folks who are sitting here today. However, it doesn't sound like my amendment is going to get a single vote from anyone with voting power around this room. I just wanted to say clearly that I did certainly have heard this from my constituents. There is a concern. Those who are bringing in particularly a lot of the recreational vessels, people who can afford, it's one of my favorite lines from Gus Speth about neoliberalism is that a rising tide lifts all yachts. Well, those are folks I'm not worried about carrying the insurance. Fishing, I know I have the same concern. I have a lot of fisher people and a lot of fishermen in my riding. But given all the other costs they carry to conduct fishing operations, I think carrying wreck insurance would be a very small component overall, and there's other ways to deal with that in making sure that those who have the smaller vessels, who don't carry the insurance, who aren't therefore swept up with as much of the responsibility that this act creates. Somewhere between 20 gross tons and 300 gross tons, there are a lot of vessels. Unfortunately, we're only going through this clause by clause now. There's not going to be any other opportunity until this bill comes back to us some years from now to see how it's working. I think we all know that a lot of what's going to make this bill work is going to be subsequent regulations, and this could be gotten at there, so I'd urge that. And the other thing is, of course, that what's going to make this bill work is going to be the extent to which the budget is there to actually act when the various ministers under this act with the power to act, actually have the resources to do so. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, yes, Mr. Badaway.
To say, although there's an expectation that we may not vote for all the amendments that come from the opposition or the Green Party, like Mr. Fraser, I struggled with this one as well. But again, I have to reiterate what I said earlier. One is the vessel owners, or what staff said and confirmed, is that all vessel owners remain liable under the Wreck Removal Convention, regardless of the size of the vessel. So that's point number one. Point number two is the consultations that took place. The consultations that specifically took place with insurers, and there's a reality attached to that. And then thirdly, again, although mixed messaging, I'm hearing there's still an implication, albeit what size the implication is, on taxpayers, a negative implication. So with those said, I just simply, Madam Chair, can't support this amendment.
Thank you. So I will call the vote. All right, shall the amendment PB1 carry? Please raise your hands, those in favor. Opposed? Does not carry. Shall clause 24 carry? Opposed? It carries. Okay, we have some grouping. We'll group clause 25 to 31. All those in favor of clause 25 to 31? Opposed? Carried. Okay, NDP 3. Ms. Malcolmson, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. We had some evidence from witnesses at committee that 2 years is an unreasonably long period of time for any community or the Coast Guard to monitor a vessel. And the Washington State model is a 90-day period within any 365-day period. So to be able to deal with the backlog, to be able to take quick action, my proposed amendment is to have the action happen when a vessel is unattended for a period of 90 consecutive days, as opposed to 2 years, as is right now in the legislation.
Okay, Ms. Jordan, and then Mr. Fraser, and then we'll go. Oh, okay.
I expect we may end up in a similar place with our comments here, coming from the same part of the world. I am curious to hear why the magic behind 2 years exists, but on the flip side of that equation, I know boats at home that have been sitting around for more than 90 days that would be captured by this, and I'd suggest 90 days would be, if 2 years is unreasonably long, 90 days would be unreasonably short given the circumstances I'm dealing with at home, because there's people who have boats that are in good shape that they want to leave there that might be caught here. But I am curious as to why 2 years is the magic number on the flip side of that token.
Thank you. I guess I'd say a few things. 2 years was in part selected because in the Navigation Protection Act, there was a 2-year presumption as well. The very important difference in this case is that never before Bill C-64 would there have been an actual prohibition on abandonment. So that was more of a process question for being able to act on the vessel, whereas now there's the prohibition associated with it. The 90 days was considered and considered not long enough, given that it's quite normal for vessel owners to leave their vessel unattended but not abandoned for at least a season, and the length of a boating season varies across the country. So, so the choice was made to stick with the 2-year, and there's of course the possibility over time to adjust that if evidence suggests that that's too long. It doesn't change the fact that if there's evidence of abandonment, you don't have to wait 2 years. When there's evidence that a vessel has been abandoned, that can be dealt with immediately. It's also important to remember that the prohibition on abandonment is only one of the ways in which this legislation enables action. There's also the 60-day prohibition of a dilapidated vessel being in the same location without the approval of the owner or operator of the site, the 48 hours that a vessel can't be adrift. So there are other things that allow you to act quickly in specific circumstances. And again, more generally, if there's evidence of abandonment, it can happen at any time, and the 2 years was chosen as the starting point for the presumption of abandonment.
Ms. George?
Thank you, Chair. Similar comments to my colleague, Mr. Fraser. It would not be unusual for someone to come to their cottage or their summer place in my riding, put their boat in the water in April, and then not come back until September. That doesn't mean the vessel is abandoned. So my concern with this is 90 days. I feel is just way too short. But I appreciate the comments on where the 2 years came from, because that was also my question: is where did that number come from? Thank you.
Ms. Malcolmson?
Thank you, Chair. I'll flag that Washington State's abandoned vessel program uses 90 days. They've had their legislation in place since 2003 and have amended it several times, so they haven't found that this is a barrier. But that said, 2 years does seem like a really long time. Community's been waiting a long time already. So if anybody's got any other date suggestions that cuts the difference, then it would be great if we could get some change on that. Thank you.
I recognize, Madam Chair, you're probably going to have to point this out soon anyway, that if Sheila Malcolmson's NDP 3 is defeated, it's identical to my Green Party 2 or Parti Vert 2 in your package. So I just wanted to speak to it to say I also drew this amendment for 90 days from the testimony of the Ladysmith Maritime Society. It may be that we need to think in terms of regulations down the road that are specific to the coastal situations that we face. Bernadette and Sean's, I know exactly where I used to live there. I know what our winters are like. There's not a recreational vessel left abandoned on the coast of Nova Scotia that's there in the spring. They're gone, right? But in the Gulf Islands, those fiberglass vessels just hang around and they build up and they become dilapidated. They become refuges for the homeless. We have a housing crisis that leads to people to live in unsafe, derelict vessels, and they're not only eyesores, they're dangerous. So just a word, I know my amendment will go down to defeat as Sheila's does. You know, there's always a chance that yours is going to pass and we'll be surprised. But if hers goes down, mine won't be votable. So I just wanted to say, please keep in mind as we go through this legislation, maybe we need to distinguish the regimes so that they're site-specific and specific to, as Washington State does, it works there. It works for them. 90 consecutive days out of any 365-day period works for Washington. It might not work for Nova Scotia. So let's keep this in mind as the legislation is road tested.
Okay, thank you all very much. So just for the information of the committee, if NDP 3 is adopted, PV 2, Ms. Mays, cannot be moved. If NDP 3 is defeated, PV 2 is also defeated, right? So we'll ask for a recorded vote on NDP 3. All those in favor, please.
Mr. Badaway. Sorry? Okay. Mr. Hardy. Mr. Iacono. Mr. Fraser. Ms. Jordan. Mr. Reid. Mr. Hoback. Ms. Malcolmson. Yeas pour 1, nays contre 7, 7.
Okay, it does not carry. and therefore PB2, as Ms. May pointed out. Thank you for joining us. I do not have to move that, so I'll go right into clause 32. Okay, shall clause 32, I can go right to 32. Okay, there we go. Shall clause 32 carry? All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Okay. And then we're going to be grouping clauses 33 to 44. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, the next one is Government G2. Mr. Fraser?
Yeah, I'm happy to move Government Proposed Amendment 2. Perhaps I'll save the officials some time. This is a pretty simple, straightforward one. Every other time the legislation refers to a vessel or wreck, this simply refers to a wreck, and this would only have this provision be consistent with the rest of the legislation. It was just, to my understanding, a little oversight.
Government want to add a comment to what Mr. Fraser has said? No? Okay, that's fine. Okay, any further comments? See any? Shall the amendment G2 carry? Yes. Thank you, it carried. Shall the clause 45 carry as amended? Yes, okay. And then we have clauses 46 to 56. All those in favor? Thank you, they carry. Clause 57, Ms. Malcolmson.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, this one must be easy for everybody to say yes to, because the minister already said yes to it. We heard so many witnesses say, whether it was the Environmental Law Association, West Coast Environmental Law Association, Sunshine Coast Regional District Board, Islands Trust Council, Ladysmith Maritime Society, all say, why can we not have one lead agency that is the filter through which any abandoned vessel complaint or concern goes through? Understanding in many cases there will be different government departments that internally take responsibility, but there is one-stop shopping. One of our witnesses said, why can't I phone 1-800-RECEIVE-A-WRECK, as an example. And so this was the legislation that my predecessor, Gene Crowder, brought forward in the House. A Liberal government, when they were the third party, unanimously voted in support of it. Conservatives, unfortunately, defeated it. And then I brought it into my legislation, Bill C-352. And then the minister said, yes, all the, if you go to the website now, if you look at our new organizational tables, in fact, you will see that Coast Guard now is going to be the public interface. So I think that's a win for coastal communities. I'd love to see it reflected in this legislation. Again, it doesn't mean that the Coast Guard is the one that is the cleanup crew, but it is the single point of contact, that if you think there's a concern with an abandoned vessel, you go through legislation. And that's what we heard from the minister in his testimony before the committee. And if we could get this reflected in this bill, then that would be an even better win for coastal communities. Thanks.
Ms. Jordan?
My understanding with this legislation, and perhaps the officials can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the minister already has the authority to designate any person, including an official within the Canadian Coast Guard, as the receiver of wrecks. Is that correct? Okay. So would this amendment then not add to the confusion and ambiguity? Because then I would wonder, the general public then, who is responsible? Because ultimately the Minister of Transport is responsible, correct? So therefore, we already have a designated person who looks after all of it.
So thank you. Just to kind of build on that, there may be some confusion about single point of contact versus receiver of rec. Receiver of rec is a long-standing concept in maritime law that is a designated official to look after the interests of an owner of a vessel, of a wreck, when they are unable to be reached or have yet to be contacted or identified. It's true that, that we have made great strides in further coordinating the efforts between Transport Canada and the Canadian Coast Guard on this issue, and have agreed to have the Coast Guard serve as that public single window. But that's not to be confused with the concept of receiver of rec. The Minister of Transport designates receivers of rec individuals that are charged with doing certain things under the legislation.
Okay, Mr. Hoback?
And then we've already got the Coast Guard is the lead in regards to this.
Coast Guard is the lead on certain elements, and Transport Canada is the lead on certain elements. When it comes to the public wanting to ask a question, report a situation, report a vessel, it would be through the Coast Guard's
Coast Guard.
800 service that would be done.
Okay.
So just to confirm then, a receiver of rec isn't necessarily going to be the single point of contact. They are, in fact, currently two different functions in two different places. I've just heard you say that there is a 1-800 number that people can call for the single point of contact to report.
Thank you. Yes, I can confirm that public reporting for problem vessels will be done through the Canadian Coast Guard's 24/7 regional operation centers. They cover all coasts, all inland waters, and that's the system that's currently in place for reporting of other marine incidents like pollution incidents, for example.
So it would occur then that really, if there's confusion, because we haven't maybe publicized that fact enough to ensure that people know precisely who they can call in order to get something reported.
That's correct.
Ms. Malcolmson?
Thank you, Chair. People have been calling the Coast Guard for 10 years asking for action on abandoned vessels and have been given the runaround and told that they need to talk to somebody else. So this is a change in the government's direction, but not enshrined in legislation. So my concern is this is a mechanism that Minister Garneau agreed with when the vote was in the House 2.5 years ago. My strong advice to the committee is to still enshrine that in legislation in some way so that it's locked in for future governments and not just a program offered through this government right now.
Okay.
And I'll ask for a recorded vote when we get there. Thanks.
Okay, any further comments? All right. Then we will call for a vote on the NDP 4 amendment. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Badaway. Mr. Hardy. Mr. Iacono. Mr. Fraser. Ms. Jordan. Mr. Reid. Mr. Hoback. Ms. Malcolmson. Yeas pour 1, nays contre 7.
Okay, does not carry. Shall clause 57 carry? Okay, opposed? It carries. Okay, NDP 5, Ms. Malcolmson.
Chair. In the same vein, looking for the receiver of rec to have the responsibility and accountability to determine the owner of the rec, instead of shifting that responsibility to a third party. I appreciate that the intention of the legislation is for the federal government, based in Ottawa in many cases, to be able to work with coastal communities and get that local knowledge. And so the ability to delegate if that local government or that local environmental organization is willing to receive the delegation of responsibility, that's an important flexibility in the legislation, something that we appreciate. And something that we certainly heard from coastal communities, that they want to see their own local knowledge reflected. But then that's on the other end of the spectrum. We've had, because of the sort of abandonment, I would argue, of the federal government not supporting local communities and coastal communities to deal with abandoned vessels, that there's also a sensitivity to it not being completely downloaded, especially where the tax base isn't there. So the amendment proposed would make the receiver of rec responsible and accountable to determine the owner of the rec, but not to have the responsibility shift from the receiver of rec to a person without that body being willing to take that. And we think that this is consistent with what used to be in the Canada Shipping Act, Article 155, bracket 2, and urge the committee members to vote yes. Thank you.
Ms. Jordan?
I was just wondering, thank you, Chair, if the officials could comment on this with regards to the cost burden. I'm concerned that if this amendment is accepted, that there will be a higher cost for taxpayers, and I just wondered if you can comment on that.
Yes, certainly. So this amendment removes any discretion on the part of the receiver of rec to not take action to determine the owner of the found wreck. And the times where that sort of thing might be important is perhaps it's a wreck that someone else has already reported, and so that's not necessary. It might be a frivolous situation. There might have been an error made. The amendment in the way that it's done here removes all discretion to act appropriately on the part of the receiver of rec. It also removes the discretion from the receiver of rec of using some of the other tools in the legislation, like perhaps if the person who reported the wreck is very close to where the wreck is, it might be useful to ask that person to post a notice in that area, in that physical location. And so the way this amendment is proposed limits the flexibility of the receiver of rec to take those sorts of actions as well.
All right, everyone's okay? All right, then we will call Ms. Malcolmson.
Thank you. The way that this is written says the receiver of rec must take necessary steps to determine the owner of the wreck. If that is done, then that gives the government then the opportunity to then send that owner of the vessel the bill. I mean, this is what this is all built on, this polluter pay principle. And there's nothing in this proposed amendment that would say the step that the receiver of rec takes is to ask the person at the next dock or to ask somebody else to post a notice on their behalf. That could be, there's something that says that it has to be the receiver of rec that goes out and does the work. So I'm concerned that the witness's interpretation is unnecessarily narrow. So I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Hardy?
There we go. This change looks actually redundant, because isn't it kind of a fundamental principle of this whole legislation that the idea is to find out who the owner of the wreck is? So that will happen automatically. There would always, you would think, be some effort, even if it's very obvious, to determine who the owner of the vessel is. That will always happen in one form or another, will it not?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Much. All right, no further comments. So shall NDP 5 carry on to Mr. Would you like your recorded vote, Ms. Malcolmson?
Mr. Badaway, Mr. Hardy, Mr. Iacono, Mr. Fraser, Ms. Jordan, Mr. Reid, Mr. Holbach, Ms. Gallant, Ms. Malcolmson. Yeas pour 1, nays contre 8. Sorry.
Okay, does not carry. All right, shall clause 58 carry? Opposed? Carries. Okay, we then have clauses, shall clause 59 to 66 carry? Yes. Okay, carried. Okay, NDP 6, Ms. Malcolmson.
Thank you, Chair. In the same vein as the First Amendment that we proposed, we want the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans to act so the wording is must. Again, this is something that is focused on environmental hazard to the coast. We heard testimony from Anna Johnson from West Coast Environmental Law Association expressing concern that the ministers and receiver of wrecked powers under the Act to deal with wrecked, abandoned, and dilapidated vessels are discretionary in nature, calling into question whether or not these decision makers will actually take the necessary actions to address the backlog. A change to must and may remove discretion, increase accountability, and give coastal communities more confidence that the Act as written will actually be implemented.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy?
This would be a question for staff. Would there be any situations where this wouldn't take place? Where there wouldn't be some kind of a safety security zone around a vessel?
Oh, thank you for the question. This amendment would require and obligate the minister to declare an emergency zone in all cases without consideration for what's going on in that immediate area. So there may be remote areas with no population or marine navigation at risk. This would require an immediate establishment of an emergency zone and the necessary resources, in many cases specialized enforcement and other requirements to establish and enforce that zone, which would lead to significant costs for taxpayers. The discretionary, the may in this as drafted, gives the minister discretion to make that determination and assess each situation on its merits and its risks.
If this amendment were to pass, could it restrict activities such as navigation, fishing, impacts in a specific area? And I guess to your point where you said that there may be cases where there is no threat, and that's why the emergency zones are not there. I guess my concern would be what impact would it have on fishers or on navigation if this were to pass?
Thank you for the clarification. And yes, indeed, part of the careful consideration that the minister and his officials would need to take into account is the case of the situation, the specifics, and the impacts on navigation, fishers, Indigenous rights, and other activities in that area. The obligation to immediately establish an emergency zone would require the deployment of resources, the deployment of enforcement, and it wouldn't give the minister the discretion to assess on a case-by-case basis what the resolution to the situation needs to be.
Okay, Mr. Badaway.
To dig a bit deeper, Madam Chair, into this issue, because I do respect the intent of the amendment, and with that, I would like to ask the question that staff explain further what an emergency zone actually is. With that, who then establishes, or how do you establish an emergency zone being declared? And then lastly, the reason why I'm asking the question is because of the implications. I think for the most part, we all recognize that there are vulnerable areas that can be impacted upon an emergency zone being declared. The impacts being on navigation and fishing, of course. There can be water intakes in the area, and therefore there's a vulnerability attached to the area based on that water intake going into a community, if it happens to be environmentally sensitive. And then lastly, the impacts on the rights of the Indigenous communities that may be impacted as well. So with that, can you explain to us a bit deeper on what an emergency zone would actually be, and as well, how would then the minister or the appropriate authorities establish an emergency zone?
So in addition to the considerations that the members outlined, the minister would also has a number of tools at his or her disposal, including issuing notices to shipping to alert mariners of a hazard, and establishing an emergency zone as defined could extend to directing vessels to leave or to not enter the zone, to direct them to remain in the zone, to establish speed limits, pilotage requirements, a number of things. All those tools remain at the disposal of the minister in considering and weighing the facts of a particular situation, and may be used in certain combinations, but not necessarily all at once to declare an emergency zone, as this amendment might obligate. But the minister continues to have those tools at his or her disposal, and it's important to remember that the establishment of emergency zone would likely be undertaken if there was a real impediment to navigation, safety, and or immediate environmental danger.
Yes.
Madam Chair, so with that all stated, there obviously has to be protocols put in place to not only establish, but then to further ensure that the emergency zone is dealt with, and the implications of such are dealt with. So would it be safe to say that other organizations and or even levels of government, especially when it comes to the provinces, ministries of environment, and others would be brought into the process?
I'd say that's absolutely the case in the situation and in the geography of the incident. Local communities, provincial, territorial governments, Indigenous governments, and others may all be consulted in the development of the decision making around whether to establish an emergency zone or what other measures are necessary in this case. And I mentioned the potential tools that the minister has at his discretion. But I'd also say that it's important that that discretion remains, that all factors can be taken into consideration.
My colleague sort of answered, asked the same question I was going to ask, but in your remarks you didn't say, and maybe I'll just ask this, who is the one that clears the emergency zone? Would it be also the minister?
If an emergency zone were established, yes, the minister would establish it in concert with other authorities that may be applicable in the specific circumstance. The previous member also asked a question about enforcement, and that's another matter that would need to be taken into consideration, how that's undertaken, what authorities may be required, what other organizations may be required to enforce such a zone. All at potential cost, significant cost.
Ms. Malcolmson.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I'm going to encourage the committee members, if you're not there already, this is on page 30 of the Act, C-64. This is extremely limited to really urgent situations. If you read the wording, so what I'm proposing is that Minister of Fisheries and Oceans must, but all the other wording continues as it was. The vessel or wreck has to pose a hazard that is grave and imminent. That's one. And that's if the minister has reasonable grounds to believe that it is. So there's great discretion already built into the legislation as it is. And then the declaration of the minister about the emergency zone, he or she gets to make up their own determination about the size, which is reasonable with regard to the seriousness of the situation. So there's total discretion in here. And then it indicates a number of remedies, many of which could still include passage of fishing vessels, for example, through that area, but just under certain circumstances. So with all of that, all that discretion built in, and having this remedy being aimed directly at a hazard that is grave and imminent, I just urge my fellow members to recall that we've had a government in Ottawa for 10 years that, despite legislation and rules available to them, chose not to act and enforce those. And so to those of us who represent the coast, remember that this government with good intentions on abandoned vessels will not always be in power. And if we say that there must be a declaration around an emergency zone, then that gives all of us as potential opposition MPs in the future to hold the minister accountable to uphold this part of the bill. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Hardy.
If the minister assessed that a vessel was creating a grave and imminent hazard, why would he not declare an emergency zone around it?
I guess I would clarify that emergency zone is not a measure of response, but it's a measure, it's unnecessary really only when the presence of ships or persons might impede the intervention. There may be a very serious or grave or imminent danger, but it may be in a remote area, a place where no navigation or other traffic is present, and an emergency zone wouldn't need to be declared automatically to address the problem, to address the situation and intervene.
I'm still puzzled, though. I mean, if it's grave and it's imminent, I still don't understand how you could have a situation where something is grave and imminent and you wouldn't take this measure. I mean, grave and imminent may be, for instance, if there's an oil spill. Okay, there's a particular type of response you do to that. You put the booms around and you try and clean it up. This seems to refer more to a navigation hazard. That's the impression I get from it. And if somebody says that's a grave and imminent danger to navigation, they wouldn't say that if the vessel was isolated and there were no other ships around. You wouldn't think. You wouldn't find it as grave and imminent. So there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect here.
I would just offer the clarification again, sir, that the seriousness of the situation might cause risk to other persons, vessels, traffic, other danger to the environment. If that is not the case, so in the case-by-case consideration of what tools to deploy to intervene, an emergency zone may not always be required, even if the threat is grave or imminent. Intervention may proceed without the declaration of a zone, in other words.
Okay, now, all right, we will now call a vote on NDP 6, the amendment. Would you like a recorded vote? I assume yes. Okay. All right.
Mr. Badaway. Mr. Hardy. Mr. Iacono. Mr. Fraser. Ms. Jordan. Mr. Reid. Mr. Holbach. Ms. Gallant. Ms. Malcolmson. Nays pour 1, nays contre 8.
Does not carry. Shall clause 67 carry? All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Okay, we then go from shall clauses 68 to 73 carries. Okay, carried. All right, on to NDP 7, Ms. Malcolmson.
Once again, hoping that using the word must will increase accountability and transparency, and echoing the minister's testimony at this committee February 5, saying the bill has teeth. The particular section that we're looking at here, Clause 74, has that if the enforcement officer has reasonable grounds to believe that an offense under this act has been committed, they must direct a vessel that is about to enter or is within Canadian waters or in the exclusive economic zone of Canada to stop, to proceed through the waters that in a way that the enforcement officer may specify, to proceed out of the waters, or to remain outside the waters. So again, saying must instead of might, it gives it much more teeth. We heard evidence, for example, the case of the Farley Mowat making its way into Shelburne Harbor, that under the cover of darkness and without permission, vessels will push their way into our waters. And good intentions from this government does not mean that future governments will themselves be held in the same way. And so I encourage the committee to vote yes to including the word must in this direction to the minister. Thank you.
Mr. Fraser.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And to my colleague, one of the things that I think I'm fairly consistent on, when we're dealing with decisions being made with changing facts on the ground, I'm always cautious to say there can't be any sort of discretionary remedy or discretion in the decision-making process. So I'm wondering if the department officials have a suggestion as to what kind of circumstances would the local Coast Guard official on the ground not want to order these things? Are there instances where Perhaps the violation at issue is so, or offense at issue is so minor that you wouldn't want to give one of these orders. And if so, if you could maybe provide an example, that would be helpful.
Thank you. So I'll provide a general response and then maybe see if any colleagues have a specific example to point to. But I think it's important that in this section, the use of the word may connotes an illustrative list. So here's a list of things that the situation may require, and one of these things would be done, whereas the use of the word must suggests this is a definitive list. So they would kind of be using this list and not kind of their awareness of the situation and other options that may be out there. This list, my understanding is that this list is intended to be illustrative, not a definitive list, an exhaustive list. So that's the overarching point. I don't know if any of my colleagues have an example to point to.
I think that's exactly the interpretation. That's what's intended, that it's a range of tools, a range of options that the enforcement officer might choose to use. An example might be where, in this case, directing a vessel, it may already be tied to a wharf in Canadian waters. It may already be static. It might not be necessary in that particular case to direct the vessel to move somewhere else immediately. So it's a permissive list, as my colleague has stated.
Okay, any further comments, Ms. Malcolmson?
With respect, Section B doesn't say what the witness just described. So in this case, the enforcement officer could direct the vessel to moor, anchor, or remain there for any reasonable period that they may specify. The change that I'm trying to make here is to say that the enforcement officer, if they have reasonable grounds to believe that an offense under this act has been committed, then they must act. And then they do have a range of pieces, but some of them absolutely can include a vessel that is already tied up to a dock has to remain there and cannot then vamoose and leave the marina owner having to pay the bill, for example. So the discretion is built in there, but the action, if my amendment passed, would not be.
So if I can point to B, there's an and in there that's very important. So you're right that if this were just a list, it might have additional discretion, but B actually says that they would be directed to proceed and then to moor and do those other things. So it's kind of a string of requirements related to a particular type of scenario. And it's from that list that we know that there are more things that it may be required to do. But that and in B is very important.
Okay, any further comments? Okay. We'll call for a vote on NDP 7. Recorded vote.
Mr. Badaway, Mr. Hardy, Mr. Iacono, Mr. Fraser, Ms. Jordan, Mr. Reid, Mr. Hoback, Ms. Galland, Ms. Malcolmson. Yeas pour 1, nays contre 8.
Okay, does not carry. Shall Clause 74 carry? Okay, Clause 74 carried. Okay, so shall Clauses 75 to 94 carry? All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Okay, on to G3. Mr. Fraser?
Another fairly straightforward explanation. The language as it's currently drafted wouldn't have the administrative monetary penalty regime kick in upon the legislation being passed. Again, I think this was just a drafting oversight that can be corrected with the proposed amendment.
Okay, the department comments? Do you have anything to offer? Or
Just to add that the reason that this fairly large section was not included. There are two ways to go with the AMP regime: to do it through regulations after the legislation is in place, or to embed it in the legislation. And we chose the embedding in the legislation to make this legislation effective more quickly, and so it was just lost in the process of drafting.
Any further comments? All right, shall the amendment G3 carry? All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Shall clause 95 carry as amended? Carry? Guess so. 91 was the amendment, and it all carried as a group. Okay. Clause 95 to 106, all those in favor? Carries. Okay. NDP 8, Ms. Malcolmson.
As written, the minister retains discretion to keep a public record of notices of violation or default for anybody that, any vessel owner that does violate the term of this legislation. My proposal is to change the word to must so that there is transparency and a record keeping of the number of violations and the number of fines that are issued. I think if we do not do this, how will the public ever know whether this legislation has had any effect? Thank you.
Much. On this one, I'm inclined to support it. Perhaps, Sheila, I'll throw something out there. There's one concern I have on this one. Typically, as I just explained, when facts are changing on the ground, I think discretion can be important. When we're dealing with the process, when there's sort of a conclusion is made, there's a violation been committed, I think transparency is a valuable thing. There's one minor concern I have, that in certain very minor offenses, we might be putting a fairly heavy consequence on someone who may not deserve it. I don't know that that's enough to say we shouldn't report it, and I'm just curious if that serves as an obstacle to you. I think I'm comfortable with the language as you've put it forward, but there's one outstanding issue I wanted to give you a chance just to comment on, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's fair. The way that the legislation is written, simply saying a public record does not mean that there will be necessarily kind of in the town centre a wall of shame. And as we know, sometimes the government records do take some time to dig up. It could be an access to information request. It could be, I think it would be ideal that we would have the minister report to Parliament periodically to say there were X number of violations, and then if it was up to any member of Parliament or journalist that wanted to dig in on that, fair enough. But I just want to have good record keeping and at least to know that this legislation is being well used. Thanks, Chair.
Any further comments? Okay. All right. Shall NDP 8 carry? Oops. Back over to the clerk. Recorded vote.
Mr. Badaway. Mr. Hardy. Mr. Iacono. Mr. Fraser. Ms. Jordan. Mr. Reid. Mr. Hoback. Ms. Gallant, yes. Ms. Malcolmson? Yeas pour 9-9.
Carried. Congratulations, Ms. Malcolmson. It's been a hard day's work for you. All right. Shall 107 carry as amended? All those in favor? Carried. Okay. Clauses 108 and 109. Shall they carry? Carried. Okay. All right. G4, Mr. Fraser.
Number 4. Yes, thank you. So I was looking at the wrong page. This is just essentially another a drafting error. I think the section number 78 was potentially put in the wrong place, and it refers only to a particular offense, interfering with an enforcement officer. And the intent was to, I understand, make this a more serious offense. If I've perhaps missed something, if the department wants to comment, if you think I've captured it, I'm happy to put that to a vote.
Any further comment? No? All right. Okay, shall G4, the amendment, carry? Yes. All right, we have CPC 1 from the Conservatives. Mr. Halbach, did you want to speak to this?
Clause?
Yeah, you don't have to move it if you don't, but you can certainly speak to it if you like.
Yeah, Chair, no, we had a discussion with you about this beforehand, and if it's committee's will, we'll actually withdraw it with the understanding that we'll actually do a small study on this. We understand the clerk has done some great work on this, so we have a chance to analyze that work and maybe bring forward some witnesses. It sounds like the first week after the 2-week break is
I
what
believe
you're
we've already got a March 19th tentative date from our clerk. Mr. Badaway?
Chair, and that's great. I think this is great that we're going to go down this road because it is separate from what we're dealing with right here, right today. But having said that as well, would it be appropriate to include heritage in these discussions?
We'll invite them.
Okay.
Parks Canada?
Ministry.
Certainly, when the issue was raised at committee on the war graves, it caused concern for all of us. And so I support, do we need a unanimous consent for Mr. Hoback to withdraw that motion? We have unanimous consent to withdraw the CPC 1 and, yeah, CP 1 and CP 2. And we'll do a report at committee. Yes, Ms. Malcolmson?
Chair, for the benefit of the witnesses that we had at committee who put a lot of time into their testimony, and also for the people watching at home, I wonder if you or if one of the Conservative representatives could just give us a couple of sentences about what we heard or why it is that we're going to study this in further detail rather than to include it into this legislation.
Okay, Mr. Hoback?
Yeah, just in discussions, there seems to be some confusion on whether or not this actually topic would fit in with C-64, or if it actually would be better something maybe as a standalone piece of legislation because of the different areas it actually implicates. And so that's why we thought if we could actually do a separate study on it, that'd give it a chance to really focus and shine a light on this particular issue in such a way to give it the appropriate attention it probably deserves. And hopefully that will be tabled in the House, I understand, and then from that tabling, we can see some legislation come forward either from a government or through a private member's bill that actually take up this cause.
Certainly, Mr. Hardy?
But to respond to Ms. Malcolmson's suggestion, the intent of the people who came as witnesses was to note the fact that there are sunken warships and sunken merchant marine ships now sunk for many years, and disturbing those wrecks because they are grave sites should be dealt with. It should be addressed. And that's why, as the chair mentioned, there was general agreement around the table that that is something that needs to be addressed. This isn't necessarily the right place to do it, and I'm very, very happy, in fact, that we're headed in the direction to address that because we do have to honor those people properly.
Mr. Iacono?
Says we don't want to associate these grave sites to wreckages. I think they deserve more than that, and it'd be best to split the two matters and give it the proper and honorable attention.
Exactly. Good. All right. Thank you. So shall Clause 110 carry as amended? Yes. All those in favor? Carried. Then we can go on Clause 111 to 118. Will they carry? Carried. Okay. Clause 119. Mr. Badaway?
Again, a drafting error, Madam Chair.
Okay. Does the department want to comment on it? If not, we'll go into all those in favor of G5. Okay. And then, where is it? I lost my place here. Does it carry? Yeah. So it does carry. Okay, I lost my track here.
No, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I just wanted to go back to CPC Motion 1. I think you asked us to vote on the clause as amended, but in fact we were...
It had been amended by G4.
Oh, okay.
And the CPC 1 and later 2 were withdrawn.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. So, okay. So this carried. So shall 119 carry as amended? All those in favor? Carries. Okay. All right. right, shall clauses 120 to 128 carry? All those in favor, they're carried. Clause 129, G6. Mr. Fraser?
Certainly. One of the issues with this, this again, just a drafting issue. As drafted currently, there's risk that the government could not go after the owner who's responsible for the sort of collateral cost of removing a wreck. Let's say there's a fence needed to be removed, there's damage done during the removal process. Keeping in line with the polluter pays principle, this would allow the legislation would make the person who abandons a vessel responsible for the cleanup.
Okay, any comments? Okay, all those in favor of G6, please raise your hands. Carried. Shall clause 129 carry as amended? Carried. Okay, clause 130, any comments? Shall clause 130 carry? Carried. Okay. And 131 was withdrawn at the request of Mr. Hoback. And it goes back onto the same issue of war graves. And so then, shall clause 131 carry? All those in favor, it carries. Okay, NDP 9.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a piece imported from my private member's bill C-352 that was stopped in the House back in the fall. It would require every 5 years the minister to review the operation of this act, C-64, and a report to the House setting out a report about the efficacy of the act and the resulting review that had happened. So we had a number of witnesses talk about the serious backlog, and the Andrew Kendrick, for example, talked from Vard Marine about we are starting from a bad place. We need to address the backlog of abandoned vessels. They're a growing number. And so having some transparency and accountability and reporting to Parliament on how well this legislation worked would certainly help with future amendments or regulatory changes as we modify. There's very good precedent for this. The Aeronautics Act has a requirement within 2 years after the day on which the subsection comes into force, and every 5 years thereafter commits a comprehensive review of the provisions and operation of the section. Canadian Environmental Protection Act has every 5-year review, and then several acts in this Parliament that require periodic reevaluations. That includes Employment Equity Act, Agricultural Marketing Programs Act, Lobbying Act, Canada Small Business Financing Act, Business Development Bank of Canada Act, Export Development Act, Canada Infrastructure Bank Act, and Washington State, which again has a very good legislative model that we heard directly from. Their legislation has been in place for 15 years. They use this periodic review. So I urge my fellow committee members, for the sake of transparency and accountability, to vote yes to requiring a 5-year reporting and review.
Okay, any questions on to the department officials?
Thank you. Elsewhere in Bill C-64 is a requirement for a 5-year review by one or more parliamentary committees. And these would, of course, include all political parties in the review. I think the view is that this would be redundant as a result to have another 5-year review, 5 years after the legislation is in place. And certainly the Act can be reviewed when that's necessary over its lifetime.
Okay. Seeing any comments? All right, we'll call the vote on NDP 9.
Mr. Badaway. No. Mr. Hardy. Mr. Iacono. Mr. Fraser. Ms. Jordan. Mr. Reid. Mr. Hoback. Ms. Gallant. Ms. Malcolmson. Yeas pour 1, nays contre 8.
So clause 131-1 does not carry. All right, shall clause 132 carry? All those in favor? Carried. Okay, NDP 10.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in this case, and we heard quite a bit of testimony on this, other states, Washington State in particular, that has a very successful abandoned vessel program, they have a system to prevent Crown assets having been sold, or I guess they put conditions on Crown assets that are sold so that it's the seller, in this case the Government of Canada, is confident that whether it's a naval vessel, whether it's an old Coast Guard vessel, for one, they're going to a dignified end, but also the person receiving them has got the means to look after them. On the British Columbia coast, we've got vessels all over the place that still have the government logo, whether it's BC Ferries, whether it's Coast Guard, and certainly on the Atlantic coast, we have a great number of people maybe with good intentions around purchasing surplus Navy vessels, but nevertheless, they've become great liabilities for coastal communities and municipalities, some of whom we heard directly at this committee. So our recommendation is to include, I'll just read it. If the accepted surplus Crown asset is a Canadian vessel within the meaning of Section 2 of the Wrecked, Abandoned, or Hazardous Vessels Act that is capable of being used for safe navigation, then the minister must take the measures that are necessary to ensure that the vessel remains in that condition until it is disposed of under this Act.
Thank you. Mr. Fraser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I understand the intent of the proposed amendment correctly, it's to prevent a social harm that's important to me, but I'm not sure it captures it. I think the problem that I'm thinking of is one where the government doesn't sell a dilapidated vessel, but sells a potentially a vessel that's in decent condition, and it subsequently becomes dilapidated. Potentially because the owner didn't disclose, or the new owner didn't disclose their purpose for buying it. Maybe they had great plans, and the market that they had plans for, the bottom fell out of. I'm not sure. But when I look at the act that we have before us, this would apply equally, I understand, to the government and to private owners, and I'll perhaps get some clarity on that, such that I think the harm is already protected against. Because the government couldn't allow their own vessel to become dilapidated. And I don't know that this would prevent the harm of the sale of a good vessel in working condition that would subsequently become dilapidated. Could you perhaps comment as to whether the harm I'm trying to describe, perhaps inarticulately, is captured by the proposed amendment?
I'm going to try. My understanding, in fact, is that the conditions of sale issue is dealt with in NDP 11, and NDP 10 is aimed at retaining vessels that are surplus and intended for sale in good working order. Is that correct? So
they're certainly related. In this NDP 10, we're particularly trying to get at the vessels that are in the possession of the government. We heard testimony from the town of Shelburne and Bridgewater that some of these vessels originate from the federal government. The example of the Farley Mowat is kind of a famous one, where for a while the vessel was held by the government and had an opportunity then not to be able to pass it on. And so the 10 and 11 are related, but this is maybe this was the Farley Mowat, for example, was not originally a Crown asset, but nevertheless, it having confiscated it, it did hold it at a certain point and had the ability to prevent it from going into even worse hands.
So. The amendment as proposed to the Surplus Crown Assets Act would require the duplication by the Minister of Public Services and Procurement of activities that currently exist elsewhere. So if if a department, say the RCMP, has a boat that they are wanting to surplus of a certain size, generally they would retain it in situ and until the actual sale took place. This amendment suggests that the Minister of Public Services and Procurement take responsibility for maintaining that vessel in good working order from its acceptance as surplus to its disposition. The Minister of Public Services and Procurement deals with all assets across government and cannot have the expertise to maintain all of those assets in that way.
Mr. Hardy?
So the question becomes, would the government then be in a position of having to, maintain something in a seaworthy condition, even though it's surplus? Or is it the situation where the government, when it's time to sell, can establish the terms and conditions of sale so that the vessel might not be able to be used for certain things because it is no longer seaworthy?
So again, I guess I'm looking to the chair for guidance. The conditions of sale issues are in NDP 11. And so I'm not sure what I'm providing technical support on.
I guess where I was going for the first part of the question was, would we potentially be looking at significant cost to the government to maintain a surplus vessel in seaworthy condition? That's the first thing. If there was no requirement for the government to keep a vessel in seaworthy condition, and the government knew that it was not seaworthy when it sold it, could it then not, through the terms of sale, ensure that it was not going to be sold as though it was seaworthy? Is that clear?
So certainly the government wouldn't sell an asset, suggesting that it was seaworthy when it wasn't.
But I think the intention here is to prevent an unseaworthy vessel from going out there, and if the government knows at the time of sale that a vessel is not seaworthy, can it then apply conditions to the sale that says this vessel is not seaworthy and therefore certain things cannot be done with it?
So you asked if there was significant cost. The significant costs associated with this amendment are to duplicate the maintenance and technical expertise associated with maintaining vessels within public services and procurement when they already exist in the departments that own and operate these vessels. It's highly unlikely that a government vessel that's operational, that is desired to be sold, will be left to deteriorate so that it cannot be sold as an operating vessel. And that seems to be the scenario that this amendment is seeking to address.
Okay.
And then Mr. Badaway.
Just to that point, I think that this legislation covers government vessels. So therefore, they're not allowed to become derelicts. Is that not basically boiling it down to the basic? I mean, this legislation says you can't have an abandoned, derelict, or dilapidated vessel. So therefore, the government could not have that. Is that not correct?
So this legislation does not cover government vessels.
Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, to some extent, an amendment that may be redundant. And the reason why I say that is because, and correct me if I'm wrong, does Treasury Board not already have the ability to prescribe conditions on the sale of surplus assets under the Surplus Crowns Assets Act?
Yes, they do. Section 3 of that act gives them the authority to do that, and that's That's as well why NDP 11 that would be relevant for NDP 11.
Right, great, thank you.
Right. Okay, we will call for a vote on NDP 10. All those in favor, back over to our clerk.
Mr. Badaway, Mr. Hardy, Mr. Iacono, Mr. Fraser, Ms. Jordan, Mr. Reid, Mr. Hoback, Ms. Gallant, Ms. Malcolmson. Yeas pour 1-1, nays contre 8-8.
Okay, does not carry. All right, NDP 11. Kind of been spoken to already a bit, but
Yeah,
Ms.
thank you,
Malcolmson,
Chair.
if you want to-
You know, the previous one being trying to keep the asset in good shape so that then the worst case scenario doesn't happen around disposal of Crown assets. I did partly speak to this when I was introducing NDP 10. The intention is that we don't have irresponsible owners take on Crown assets that then deteriorate some of our highest profile abandoned vessels in this country originally were government assets. So I guess my question to the witnesses is, given that Treasury Board already is able to put limits on the sale, what's the remedy? I mean, how can we, as representatives of this government, how will we not continue to be embarrassed by seeing Coast Guard and Navy vessels, or in the case of the Farley Mowat, a vessel that had been in the possession of government that then they sold to a third party that did not take care of it. It became ruinously expensive for the taxpayer to address. And that C-64 does not regulate or cover government vessels. How can we prevent this major source of high-profile abandonment?
Thank you. So a few different things. I think it's already been mentioned the Treasury Board has the ability to deal with conditions of sale, but I will note that it's very difficult in talking to our colleagues at Public Services and Procurement. We learn it's extremely difficult to impose conditions that can't be verified at the time of sale. So they do impose conditions like if you're going to tow the vessel, you need to have insurance from a certified insurer because they're able to verify that at the time of sale. Things that might happen later beyond the point of sale are more difficult to address. And often the problem with these vessels tends to be on the resale as well, not just on that first initial sale. We heard when we were here as witnesses to your deliberations in the past, the Coast Guard was speaking to the more active approach that they're taking to the management of end of life of their own vessels. We've been talking to National Defense as well, who are also taking a more a different approach to their vessels at end of life than they have in the past. And as part of it is fully our intention to be looking at what needs to be done from the perspective of the management of the government fleet. It's very much on the radar, if you will, and is being actively addressed. It's just not within the scope of this legislation.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Ms. Malcolmson?
I'll note two things. One, that Washington State does have provisions intended to prevent this major source of abandoned vessels. And I'll also note that this amendment proposes that then if the terms of the sale are not upheld, if the third-party owner does not honor the conditions that were established by the Crown at the time of sale, that then the Crown has the ability to prosecute. That's the intention, so I hope committee members will vote yes. Thank you, Chair.
All right, I will now call for a vote on NDP 11.
Mr. Badaway, Mr. Hardy, Mr. Iacono, Mr. Fraser, Ms. Jordan, Mr. Reid, Mr. Hoback, Ms. Gallant, Ms. Malcolmson. Yeas pour 1-1, nays contre, 8.
Does not carry. Shall clauses 133 to 150 carry? All those in favor? Carried. Okay, 150, NDP 12.
Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal reflecting on a great number of witnesses that described the vessel registry being full of errors, not current, not accurate, the licensing database being out of date, and very little use in tracking down owners in many cases. Everybody agreeing that polluter pay is a good principle, understanding that the intention of the minister's legislation here, C-64, is to send fines and penalties to those who abandon their vessels, but without being able to actually find the owner, there's no way to send them a bill. And so this amendment is intended to fix that vessel registration, to ask the Canadian Registrar of Vessels to have a reporting function, which has never been done. We weren't able to find any evidence of, although this person is in that position, he's never actually issued a public report. And not only vessel registration, but also the pleasure craft licensing at a minimum to report on the number of vessels that are registered. If we don't get this kind of reporting to Parliament and this kind of transparency, I'm not sure that we will really have a good handle on both the backlog of abandoned vessels, the current legitimate and responsible owners that are out there doing the right thing with their vessels. And without this, we may not get a sense of whether we're really tackling the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy?
I think that based on what we've heard, Madam Chair, that there's not a lot of confidence right now in the registration system, and clearly if we're looking back to, especially pleasure craft abandoned on the West Coast and other issues that have come up, a more robust registration system is going to be required if we're to preempt this kind of an issue off in the future. So the question is, does this legislation lead us toward a more robust registration system? And secondly, are there in fact already provisions in the legislation that would require the kind of reporting that Ms. Malcolmson is looking for?
Thank you. As part of the national strategy on abandoned vessels that was introduced under the Oceans Protection Plan, the government is exploring enhancements to both the pleasure craft licensing system and the commercial vessel registry, the large vessel registry, both of which are regulated under the Canada Shipping Act 2001. It's the reason that they remain there under the Canada Shipping Act 2001 is that these systems are not exclusively dedicated to supporting abandoned and wrecked vessels. They have a broader purpose and marine safety purpose, and so it's appropriate that they continue to be regulated within the context of the Canada Shipping Act 2001. In terms of reporting, the performance of the Canadian Register of Vessels and the pleasure craft licensing regime are already captured in Transport Canada's departmental performance report, where the compliance of marine safety regulations are assessed annually. And as part of reporting on initiatives under the Ocean Protection Plan, reporting on the enhancements that are underway to the licensing and registration systems will also take place.
Any further questions or comments? Ms. Malcolmson?
Say two things. When we asked the Library of Parliament for reporting on vessel registration, they said that they couldn't find any record of that there was no reporting, and that's our own in-house research station. So the transparency is not there. And to say that this program, that exploring enhancements to vessel registration is going to sit on the government website is not giving us comfort about actual implementation. So I think given that vessel registration, we heard from countless witnesses, whether it's the Chamber of Shipping, whether it's John Weston, whether it's Washington State, whether it's multiple local governments, they all said your program won't work without transparency and improvements to vessel registration. So why this government would not take the opportunity to import into its commitments to the country that it will report on the state of vessel registration. Of course, the housing of vessel registration may well sit within another act, but you're not going to get out abandoned vessels without nailing the registration program, and there is zero downside to including that in this legislation, and I would argue that excluding it is going to leave coastal communities not sure what commitments this government will keep and what transparency there will be beyond the life of this current government.
Mr. Hardy?
I think that certainly by flagging the fact that a report already does exist, that we now know where to look, you know, and I would actually like the staff to comment on Ms. Malcolmson's point that our Library of Parliament couldn't find this report. So can you confirm, A, that it does exist, and certainly if it does, then we do know where to look in the future with respect to the performance of the registration system?
So I can confirm that that compliance with marine safety regulations is in the departmental performance report. If the library was looking for something in particular labeled with respect to the pleasure craft licensing system, perhaps that was not found because there is no report that is called that. And I can say that there is extensive public reporting through the departmental performance report going forward on the Oceans Protection Plan. And as I mentioned, key parts of the national strategy on abandoned vessels are improvements in particular to the pleasure craft licensing system, which is generally recognized to have some significant deficiencies. Work is actively underway with the provinces and territories to improve that in a very significant way.
Seeing any further comments or questions, I'll call the vote on NDP 12 and over to the clerk.
Mr. Badaway, Mr. Hardy, Mr. Iacono, Mr. Fraser, Ms. Jordan, Mr. Reid, Mr. Hoback, Ms. Gallant, Ms. Malcolmson. Nays pour 1-1, nays contre 8-8.
Does not carry. Okay. Shall clause 151 carry? All those in favor? Carried. Shall clause 152 carry? Carried. Okay. Ms. Malcolmson.
This is our final amendment. The pieces of legislative change that we've been hearing from West Coast local governments, Union of BC Municipalities, Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities, City of Victoria, Islands Trust Council, Regional District of Nanaimo, repeatedly had all of these elements. Fixing vessel registration, looking at a vessel registration fee that would owner finance removal of boats, implementing a vessel turn-in program that includes designation of disposal areas for vessels, implementing recycling facilities, supporting local marine salvage to help dispose of wrecks, and then the reporting to Parliament. These were all the elements of my legislation that was voted, that was blocked back in December. However, many of these pieces are embedded within the government's commitments through its website. And action is moving forward behind the scenes, but not within a legislated framework and not with the accountability that reporting to Parliament would entail. So my argument to fellow committee members to reflect the advice that we've had for about 15 years of pressure, and the reason we have this legislation really is because coastal communities on both coasts have been pushing so hard and identifying quite rightly that there's a big hole in jurisdiction in Canada, that we haven't had the federal leadership that we've needed, and that the burden has fallen disproportionately to coastal communities in the absence of federal leadership. Why not enshrine all of these elements into the legislation? This is a perfect opportunity to do so, and then to have that reporting back to constituents 5 years from now to say, these are all the measures that were taken by the government, this was the experimentation. The proposal from Minister Garneau is entirely consistent so far as the individual commitments made within the abandoned vessel strategy, within the Oceans Protection Plan. But I'm concerned that, especially with only 2 more years in this government's term, that those commitments will not last beyond this government as long as they sit only on a website and not embedded within legislation. So for the sake of transparency and accountability, and also visibility, when this issue dies away a little bit, we still want to be able to have the government's commitments locked in and to have action and implementation. And then the ability, as Washington State has done, and Oregon and Florida and Norway and many other countries, they are able then within the frame of Parliament to revisit and reevaluate and make amendments to their regulations and legislation as time goes on. I think we'll all end up better off if we do lock those commitments into the bill. Thank you.
Ms. Jordan and then Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a number of concerns with this amendment, specifically the calling for a national strategy on abandoned and wrecked vessels, which actually already exists. I mean, it's already encompassed as part of the Oceans Protections Plan. It's a $1.5 billion plan. So if we say, okay, let's do a national strategy with this amendment, it's being redundant. We already have a national strategy. Secondly, with regards to fees, fee structures are very difficult and they're complex issues, but I agree with you that we need to do something in terms of the fees and where they go, and is a vessel turn-in program the right way to go? Possibly, but I think that should be addressed in regulations, not necessarily legislation. And thirdly, I'm concerned with the implementation for a turn-in and recycling program for end-of-life of vessels, because the provinces and the territories have jurisdiction over waste and land management, and I don't think it would be appropriate for the federal government to legislate a program for disposal without having, good stakeholder conversations and consultations with the provinces, with the territories, to make sure that we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm cognizant of the fact that we're near the end of our meeting, so I'll try to wrap up quickly. I accept the criticisms of the proposed amendment that my colleague, Ms. Jordan, just put forward, but I wanted to take this opportunity as my last time to speak on this motion to thank a few different people. Mr. Weston, who testified before us, made this an issue. Ms. Malcolmson, the member for Nanaimo Ladysmith, has been a great advocate for abandoned vessels and brought witnesses who showed us pictures of the impact on the West Coast. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my colleague Bernadette Jordan for her tremendous effort on this file as well. This is not something that I campaigned on in the last election, despite it being an important issue for me. Bernadette, I say in all sincerity, I do not think this would be happening without your effort, and I'd like to thank the Minister for piggybacking on the heavy lifting that you've done, and thank you for protecting our coastal communities.
Thank you. Ms. Malcolmson.
I'll just say at a final word, I'll note from the Minister's mandate letter, quote, as Minister, you will be held accountable for our commitment to bring a different style of leadership to government. This will include close collaboration with your colleagues, meaningful engagement with opposition members, parliamentary communities, and the public service. And then on transparency, we've also committed to set a high bar for openness and transparency in government. It is time to shine more light on government to ensure it remains focused on the peoples that they serve, end quote. The national strategy, if the government is going to do it, then why not say in legislation we are going to do it and impose on the government a requirement to report back to the people in coastal communities after the fact? You can't have it both ways. You can't campaign and keep doing press releases and re-update your website, but say no to making that same commitment. It's not duplicative. It's enshrining for transparency and for accountability, something that will last beyond this term of Parliament, beyond any of our service. Other governments around the world have done it, and Canada would be stepping up into the modern marine age if you were to vote yes to this final amendment I propose. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Malcolmson. Okay, all right, we'll call for a vote on NDP 13.
Mr. Badaway? Mr. Hardy? Mr. Iacono? Mr. Fraser? Ms. Jordan? Mr. Reid? Mr. Hoback? Ms. Gallant? Ms. Malcolmson? Yeas pour 4, nays contre 5, 5.
Does not carry. Okay, clause 153, all those in favor? Clause 154, all those in favor? Carried. Okay. All right, shall Schedule 1 carry? Carried. Shall Schedule 2 carry? Carried. Shall Clause 1 carry, which is the short title? Carried. Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry as amended? Carried. Shall I report the bill as amended to the House? Yes. And shall the committee order a reprint of the bill? Yes. Good. That's fabulous work, folks. We've got through a wonderful piece of legislation that I think affects an awful lot of people around, and with the help of everybody. Mr. Hoback?
Yeah, just in regards to the motion I withdrew, I just wanted some clarification. So we are going to report that to the House. When would you like a witness list created and given to the clerk? Just some of the logistics around that.
Yeah.
If you want to decide that on Wednesday, that's fine, but...
We'll probably decide that, I would think the clerk will put out a notice fairly quickly. So the 19th, will go a week back, so probably by the 14th.
So do you need a motion on that?
No, because you withdrew your amendments on the condition that we were going to do a report on March 19th and invite the appropriate officials to the table. And with the help of the analysts, we'll do a report on that war graves issue as we move forward.
Okay. And question for the analyst, will she have the report available for us by Wednesday, or would she need more time?
We would need the instructions of the committee to produce a report. We had thought that perhaps it may be in the committee's interest to hear from the witnesses first with a view to putting what they say into the final version of the report, but we have background materials that can be distributed whenever would be convenient, and then there would hopefully be a short turnaround time to get the report out afterwards if the committee is happy with what they hear from the witnesses and aren't pursuing it any further.
Okay, so then you don't want to deliver your preliminary report until after the witnesses have speak. I'm fine either way, just know the process.
Document that the analysts prepared just based on seeing that the committee was very interested in the war graves issue. And so a background document's been prepared that will be can be circulated. We just got it in French a short while ago.
No problem.
So it will be circulated to all of the committee members now. Any witnesses, if we could have them in by March 14th, and we'll have our committee on March 19th. And we will go from there. That gets us into the beginning of another opportunity for a process. So thank you very much to our witnesses for your help, and thank you to all of the committee members. Move adjournment.